Okay. So maybe we should start by discussing what we would want, why we would want to use GitLab merge requests, and if someone could fill in the background on what has already been done. I think Andy and Roger provided me some background today about this already for me, but maybe we could start by gathering some requirements on what any kind of Zen submission request should still hold. Like we got some properties that Zen patch submission currently has, and we would want to improve on that by using GitLab merge requests, but we don't want to lose the properties that we already have in.
Well, I mean, I think that's basically impossible because one of the advantages that the email-based workflow has is that you can use any client you want to have the whole discussion, and I don't see how that would be possible with a GitLab kind of interface. So I think it would definitely be giving up things that we're used to with the email-based workflow in favor of some things which hopefully would be better and easier.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's still like you can use any kind of browser to access GitLab, but you of course still need a GitLab account to contribute, which might be a minor hurdle to overcome, that you first need to register on GitLab in order to be able to contribute. But I think there are also things like the various tags that you put on commits, like reviewed by, act by, signed off by. What should happen to those? If I understand correctly, those are still very useful to retain. So we might need some kind of mechanism to ensure that they are in place, and maybe some automation in place to ensure that they are actually correct, so you don't have to manually maintain them. But maybe there are things that we can do later on. But I think it would be important things to keep in mind.
I mean, so with Git, with email, you can have your own folder system. You can have, you can use Emacs, you can use Mutt, you can use, Thunderbird, you can use any number of different sort of interfaces to sort and churn through your mail and do whatever.
Yeah.
But you're never going to have all that functionality in GitLab.
So as someone who's tried to use email submission of patches before, I'm sure for the people who've already set it up, it's quite easy, but the truth is that setting it up is incredibly hard. And the reason for that is that there's a few different reasons for that. For one, any sort of webmail client almost always won't work. The Thunderbird sort of works. I've run into bugs with stuff getting hard wrapped. A lot of other clients seem to have problems. The command line clients, from what I can tell, are the ones that actually work reliably, and a lot of people don't like them. And I don't just mean like a lot, and I don't just mean like non-technical people. So the result, my recommendation, and not to mention that the command line clients generally are going to have big problems if you have a Gmail account. So my recommendation, I guess the suggestion would be, if you're going to, for email, anything that involves an email patch workflow, my suggestion would be, please provide an email server for users to use, so that they can use, so they don't have to deal with the whole OAuth authentication, all that stuff mess. Because if you can just say, hey, here's your, if you can, because Git send email, the command line tool, is pretty easy to use. If you don't have to work, if you have a standard mail server that doesn't require any sort of weird.
We do have the ability to give you a zen.org email address, and in fact, a number of people. So, for instance, people from Amazon and EPAM have a lot of difficulty sending mail from their corporate accounts, and so a lot of people end up sending mails from the Send.org account.
So like
you can send email from, so we have like a send mail thing, so you can send email from Zen.org, and then you can redirect. You can have an email address which will redirect to one of your other addresses, if that makes sense. So it's not a full, it's kind of a halfway thing, but
yeah, it's still a lot of work. If a lot of initial setup work, because
setting up a separate email account is not going to be easier than using your existing email account works.
Yes. Now, the other thing is anything that requires patches to be like well, let me try to phrase it. I think if we could have if it was something that worked. Let me try to think. Okay, so like for instance, if we had it, basically, if we had something that worked reliably with all email clients, that'd be a much better situation.
I'm looking for a Git repo with each patch submission. Would that actually help? Because then you don't need to apply the patches yourself. You have a Git repo which has the patches applied. It's very clear the base to which the patches are applied, and you can go and inspect the surrounding code.
No, because that doesn't help the first-time patch submitter, which is the case where the email workflow really has problems.
Right. So you're saying that the patch submission has its own problems, and then patch review has its own problems as well due to issues with the email client.
Patch submission specifically.
Can I break in here? So, Demi, can I break in here? So I think a lot of us understand why a lot of the things don't really work well, but for new submitters, the problem is that for the core submitters exactly already, we actually did an experiment where we tried the GitLab thing and nobody liked it. And so I think part of what needs to happen here is not to, I mean, I think all of us understand why it's difficult for new people to come on board. But what we need to do is to figure out if it's possible to make it easy for the people who have the existing setup, who already are working at sort of, we've achieved a flow state with send email, how is it possible for us to achieve the same kind of flow state with, GitLab? And how will we achieve that? Basically, I think that's where we need to understand. Does that make sense?
So that makes total sense. And for instance, if you could have it so that you make an MR on GitLab and a bot automatically sends the patch out to the mailing list, that would work really well. For instance, from a new contributor standpoint, I imagine.
Well, but then you have the problem of sorry, go ahead, Ian.
That is a thing that we didn't really try. What we tried was to use the GitLab MR kind of MR discussion. So it has like a thread, and we tried to use that to host the patch review, and that worked badly because basically it didn't really work with anybody's email workflows, and the mails went to the wrong places, and GitLab's mangling of the email addresses to get the emails to where GitLab wanted to go conflicted with where people wanted the mails to go. But we could have people submit the MR via GitLab and then automatically turn that into a patch bomb on the list and reply to the user by email using our conventional patch review workflow. That would probably help a lot with the problem of submitters having a really steep workflow. And when they were ready to send a version 2, again, they could do that with a git push command and they wouldn't have to deal with the send email. And the review discussions would be emails. They would be just like normal emails that you'd be able to have like a normal email conversation.
One thing I'm very curious about regarding email, using emails for review, how do you deal with several revisions of the same patch series? Because if you get them in separate mail threads, it's very hard to manually compare them to verify if everything was really fixed. How do you do that?
I actually wrote I wrote like a little shell script to that attempts to diff the resulting. So like you take both versions of the patch series and apply them to the same point in the tree and do a diff so you can see the difference between the two. But yeah, it's I had to build that thing myself.
So the way I've been doing this, so people who use GitLab and Forge-style workflows find that you need to do this task. You already need to do that task. And the way you do it is you fetch the relevant Git branches, which are all recorded in the system, and use like local Git wizardry, like, rebasing the two branches at the same point if necessary, and then diffing the resulting branches to check. That actually turns out to be quite straightforward. The real problems seem to come with attempts to track the state of commits, like reviews and acts and stuff like that. And our story for tracking that is really rather poor. What we're actually basically expecting a submitter to do is we are expecting the submitter to record that state themselves manually into the commit messages and then resubmit the series with that clerical work done. And that's a ridiculous way to carry on. Is not compatible with the idea that we're going to ask a novice contributor who doesn't understand the patch workflow to do that. Nobody who's never dealt with email patches will expect to do that. And also, it puts the trust in the wrong place.
Yeah, I agree.
And we can't write tooling that says, okay, how long is the delay? We can't write tooling that sort of prompts people to say, how many patches are we missing? All this different stuff. There's loads of things that is quite difficult to do in an email workflow to track what's actually happening. That would be much easier in a merge request based workflow.
And it will be also a lot easier to find previous discussions on like the previous versions of that patch, and also to see what the outstanding action still is on that patch. Is the outstanding action with the submitter? Do I need to fix something in my code? Is my code still waiting for review, maybe on some certain patch? And it's all a lot easier if I have an up-to-date view on that instead of having to go and check emails to count how many reviews I got and which ones still have outstanding X and which ones I need to ping the maintainer to review again, or which ones I've forgotten about that I had to resend once I got the X, and so on. So and that definitely benefits to having a web-based interface.
Right. There's kind of two. The problem here is not. There's actually a hard problem here. What we want is some computer system with proper access control to record the state of every patch and to keep and maintain metadata, like whose court is the ball in, and all that kind of thing. But simultaneously, we want people to be able to write detailed and highly technical comments using a user interface of their choice, typically a mail client. And there's an obvious conflict there because the mail client doesn't have the access control properties we want, and it doesn't provide the structured data. We impose a structured data on it, but it doesn't have those properties. The people who adopt the Forge-style workflows typically do most of their review comments by typing them into the web page.
Yeah, that's true. That's how we do it in the Zapi project. We exclusively use the web interface. And we didn't try to mix them with email, so we only use the web interface.
For most of us also, it's the mail client issue is we have to to configure our mail client very differently to answer to the Xen mailing list than to answer to internal mails. Force the mail client in full text mode where we get mails internally which are not in full text mode. And it's the setup that we have to maintain to have this compatible is very complex. Out of the Git send mail issue, I have no problem with Git send mail. It's more to answer comment review and keep track of it. It's not always easy when you have to maintain also other tools to work with Outlook, for example, so on our side.
So Ian, I guess it's easier for us. It's much easier for us to be able to use our own preferred mail client, but as Bertrand said, it's very difficult for them to use their own preferred mail. Like it's actually less convenient to use the mail client than it is to use the web browser.
Amazon is the same, as George mentioned. It's a pain to get things done.
But that can be solved by having two mail clients, right, and two accounts, like George suggested, like send.org account with Thunderbird, which is separate.
So the more complex you make the setup, the less probability you have to get contribution and answer to mails. Yeah. Every time I have to answer a mail from XenDevel, I have to reconfigure my mail client. And if I forget to, then I get remarks that, oh, you did not answer with the right format and etc. It's very annoying.
There is also the issue of you need to know which one to use, and it can be, as said, a mistake. Like let's say that we can't send, for obvious reason, we can't send email with the disclaimer at the end on the main list because it's not private. But then you need to do it internally, so you have to juggle between the two. I have to say I've done both. Internally, we use also Web UI. I used to dislike it, but I like the fact that we can easily track it. Otherwise, I would have to do it manually as I do it on Zen project, which is kind of a pain to do when you get hundreds email per week in your mailing box.
Also, on long series, it's hard to keep track of all the comments when you come down to V10 of a patch. Where when you use GitLab, you see the history, you can answer, you see the difference between the patches. When you have a V2, which is pushed to Xen mailing, is comparing it to V1. You need to do, as George said, do a diff manually with tools. And exporting from mail client is not always easy.
I actually like to diff the patches directly, so I typically read diffs of diffs. But I have to
but you need to export them. From Outlook, I cannot export them, so I do copy and paste.
I think the main, without disagreeing on the convenient or non-convenience of using the web interface, I think we can definitely improve the email interfaces for people that use Outlook. So the issue is that the Outlook is not, has evolved into not an email in the sense that was defined back in the day, while in open source, we still use emails as they were defined back in the day by RFCs and so on. So Outlook is not an email client that should or can be used for this, right? And there can be other email addresses that can be used for this, like provided by Xen.org, Gmail, whatever. All of them are going to be better, right? Nobody is asking contributors to use their work emails to reply to XenDevel.
Yeah, but we have some constraints internally. I have no rights to answer to work with a private email. So we have a second web server, a mail server at home. We have also restrictions due to the fact that it's part of our work.
So to be clear, I think everyone agrees that Outlook is completely incompatible with the open source world. In terms of having to copy and paste in and out, you use the archive. I put a link there. That's the same thing that the Linux kernel uses. Everything there is available. There are even tools to automatically take a patch series and apply it to your local Git tree. If you scroll down,
you need to know the baseline. That's the main problem. So then
it's encoded in the Git metadata these days. You need to be using a recent version of Git.
The thing is, the tools exist, but you need to use a combination of 10 different tools, which is very time consuming, where if you have everything integrated in a single tool, it's going faster. Everyone has solutions with websites and solutions with command lines and I use PyChu. There are solutions, but it's very time consuming.
And it just adds, it makes it much more. I mean, we get another barrier to entry. It's like, so not only do you have to set up, this gets an email, thing and have an account and blah blah blah, but now you have to learn how to use, lore.crud.org and so on.
I'm wondering. I mean, but most people, especially for small contributions and even for small reviews, the web-based UIs on things like GitLab are pretty good, and the tracking of outstanding items and review comments and stuff is really extremely useful. I've worked with projects that use that and are heavily into it, and it's really quite convenient. And there's an awful lot of like pointless clerical work that just gets ignored, and there are convenient ways of signaling metadata about where you think who you think should do the thing next, and it actually works pretty smoothly. And the real problem is if you want to like write anything complicated, you're typing your like complicated essay about some mind-boggling thing into this little text box, and it's just that part of it is really bad. And maybe what we need is a way to make it's fine for small comments. Maybe we just need a way to get like a kind of stunt gateway where you could email your review comments and it would use the GitLab API system to...
Ian, is there a reason? So, I mean, Bertrand and other people have been copying and pasting stuff in and out of Outlook. Is there any reason we couldn't copy and paste stuff in and out of the web UI? I mean, that's what I do when I'm writing, long Facebook comments or something.
What you can do is take your review comments and then cut and paste them into that box.
Yeah.
I have basically done that, right? I've got out my text editor and I've cut and pasted the thing I wrote into the other box. And, well, for anything long, that's better than using the web UI thing directly. But it's still not... I mean, it's really kind of annoying. It's probably worth it in the communities where I've worked where they do it that way. I think they have an easier time of it overall. But getting the Zen community to adopt that will be difficult because people are always more fearful of what they lose than what they gain.
I think it is worth considering the third aspect here. We've talked a lot about how to submit stuff, and yeah, it's crap. And we've talked about how to review stuff, and everyone has a different opinion. It's certainly my opinion that reviewing complicated series is unnecessarily complicated there. But the third bit that is incredibly important is how the result ends up in the Git tree. And I've spent a while working with both GitHub and GitLab, and I have not found any way to sensibly retain things like act by lines and reviewed by lines. And the thing is that perhaps I, more than most, spend a huge amount of time doing archaeology in the 20 years worth of Git history we've got to fix bugs or to figure out why we do something a certain way. Whatever we do submission-wise and whatever we do review-wise, I think it is very important that we still retain the same way that the source history looks. There are good... The way we currently do it is particularly useful for being able to go back in the future and debug things. To me, retaining the way the history ends up after it's committed is the single most important point to retain. To first approximation, I don't mind how we end up choosing what gets committed. The important point is that once it is committed, we still retain the properties that we want. So bisectability, tags, and things like that.
Would you still do the commits manually, or would you do it via the UI?
I participated in the earlier attempt to use merge requests. I do not think the web UI is going to be a useful way of having deep technical discussion on a complicated series. Obviously, we haven't actually tried doing it with a complicated series, but that is my opinion. I would like to be proved wrong.
You're wrong about that, I can tell you, because I've participated in and seen many deep, complicated technical discussions in the Rust community, which have all been run basically in merge request comments. And sometimes in individual commit line comments, and sometimes in extended discussions, or sometimes in issue comments, but it's all basically that same system. So it can be done. It's different work you have to do. So you don't wrestle with your email client. You have to cut and paste things into boxes. But it does provide, and it's not what we're used to. The actual editing of text can be a bit clumsier, but the bonuses in terms of knowing exactly which code you're talking about and what the state of it is, and having like automatic tracking of the state of things it's really hard to, you push a couple of extra commits and the CI system automatically kind of gets to work on it and posts a little thing saying this is good. Somebody says, yes, I approve of this commit, and the robot automatically does a thing, and everybody, you can see whether the issue is waiting for review or waiting for...
So a lot of what you said can be done without moving the reviews to GitLab, right? So a lot of what you said is about two things. That is the MR itself, again, not the review, the MR, and secondly, the CI loop. And that's what Git QEMU switched to, right? So QEMU switched to using the MR for patch submission instead of sending that to the list, or I think they do both. I can't quite remember. And the GitLab CI to trigger the test, and then they will tell you if things passed. And we are already doing that also. But the review still goes through email. So
if I can jump back to something that Ian said about the Rust community, I agree with him. And Rust, for example, they don't use email, right? But they use a thing called internals, which is treat it like email, right? You create a post, there's a whole threaded conversation. The code is available there for comment and whatnot. A PR will have a link to the internals discussion on it as well towards the end. A lot of what they do also is big, complicated work. The answer is this needs to be broken up. This needs to be walked in, in stages sometimes. And they break it up, and there's internals conversations there. So it is possible to do it as well. I just want to throw that out.
Right. So there is a risk with these systems because you become dependent on the service because the service becomes your archive for the conversation. So that is a thing that we might have to think about. We wouldn't have to adopt all the online fora things that the Rust community do, because mostly it's the people who are getting heavily stuck in, who are on internals, say, the dilettantes can just all stick on the forge, and well, GitLab we could use GitLab. GitLab is open. You can download the data and put it into a different GitLab instance. You can do archaeology in Rust. It works slightly differently. More of the information is outside the Git history and in the forge, or sometimes in internals. But yes, you do, like, why was this commit done? And the commit message has not very much information in it, but it does have a link to the merge request thread, the review comments, the RFC, whatever it was. And you can read all the way through that and understand why it was done this way, just the same as you would with Git commits.
So there's a feature of Git called Git Notes, where you can attach metadata to commits after the fact. I'm not sure whether that would be useful maybe as a separate service that could gather all the various discussion and put links into commit messages. But even in submissions on the mailing list, it would be useful to have an easy-to-use way to find out where on the mailing list that came from. Of course, you can look at the parts of the Git commit and try to find identifying features of the Git commit and find the message that way. But if both Zendeval and GitLab merge requests would have an easy way to find your way back from the commit to the original discussion, that would be useful. And that could be in the form of some kind of bot that either sends emails to another archive or uses Git notes or whatever other mechanism exists. Not sure whether anyone's tried to use Git notes for that purpose, though.
I think there are basically about, there are about 3 plausible sweet spots here, maybe 4. So one is like fully email based, like we are now. One is fully forge based, where all of the conversation that's relevant is done via web UIs, some of which may have a very much second-class web interface, mail interface. In the middle, there's the suggestion that you would, submit an MR and some robot would post it to the mailing list, and the review discussion would be done by email as it is now, and the submitter would get emails quoting their code, and presumably they would reply and have a conversation. We'd have to tolerate that people's email quoting when they replied to the review comments wouldn't necessarily be what we would hope for, but then they would, when they wanted to do a V2, they would push that again and update the MR, and the robot would resend it. That would be possible. That would reduce the barrier for new contributors. New contributors can probably reply to emails and update their merge request, but it does not very much for the issues that we have with metadata, the kind of mess of a data model we have, and it definitely wouldn't get us stuff like act buys translated into the commit messages.
So the main problem
I think
with
the idea would be that act buys and stuff would be, that it would still be committers manually committing things somehow.
Right. Who's going to do the clerical work of folding the act buys in?
I do a lot of that on the stuff I commit anyway, even for other stuff, because I do a lot of committing of emails where a maintainer has replied and no one has sent an updated version. So
yes. Speaking as a committer who does this, it's a complete waste of time.
That's true. Patchu does it automatically. But
Gerrit also has some feature that I just found. Of course, now Gerrit is again different from GitLab, but if it's possible to do, maybe we can reuse some code from one of these projects and see whether we can integrate with the GitLab API. I don't think we can expect GitLab to provide us with everything that we want, but if they provide a flexible enough API, we could have some automated system to do the clerical work for us.
But it is true also that when you do, when you approve, whoever actually does the merge can edit the commit message as they're merging, right? So we could imagine having a bot or something like that that would basically, once some conditions were met, would automatically pick up the stuff and edit the commit message and then do the merge.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as you restrict somehow the GitLab merge request, you don't accidentally merge it through the web interface, or well, you don't give the web interface access to the Git server of Zen, and then you always commit only using this other system. And since the number of committers is well defined and probably smaller than the number of overall submitters, that might be workable.
For this particular thing, I've seen a solution introducing a bot that acts as yet another CI check that is doing this clerical work, like preventing merging a thing that is not completed, it doesn't have all the required ads reviews and stuff like that.
Yeah, for example, on GitHub, there is one small bot that checks, but it checks just the sign-off bylines. We use that in the Zapi project. But yeah, of course, you can define more complicated checks. So which part of GitLab could we start using that wouldn't really cause conflicts with workflows? But it looks like we could achieve the solution we want, but we need to implement quite a few things to get there, which would probably be useful to do long term. But
so I think a thing that we could do right away is have a robot that will automatically patch bomb the list with a merge request. In the previous experiment, we tried to use the GitLab built-in discussion system for that, and it didn't work because the addresses were all mangled. But we could just have a robot that ran the git send email route.
Yeah,
and that would be quite straightforward, and I think that would be a net win. I think there is a lot we will be leaving on the table there, right? I hate the part where I have to go through some 20 patch series and go through my previous review comments and manually decide. I kind of have to manually track which of my review comments. I have to find every one of my, or maybe some other committers or reviewers' review comments and decide whether they've been. It's just hopeless.
But you've got to do that whatever interface you're using.
Yeah, actually, that's easier on the web.
Is what mechanism.
The work isn't deciding, looking at the change and deciding whether the comment has been addressed. The work is collating the comments together with the code so that I can make that decision.
I think Ian is saying that he wants to use GitLab because that will make that part easier. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Right.
Despite the fact that it means that writing a complicated review is considerably harder work. What you could do is patch bomb yourself with the merge request branch and use your email client to draft a reply and then cut and paste each of the replies into the quote part.
You lose a bit of features that way, so you wouldn't be able to do line-by-line replies. You can do that on your email client, but you would lose the ability to do that on the web interface. Now, it depends on what you prefer, right? If you're used to doing that via email, it's probably more natural to do it via email or do it in your editor, actually, than doing it in a web interface.
So could we start with just saying that we'll accept merge requests from. Should we basically just start accepting merge requests from GitLab and slowly automate the things that need to be automated?
I think it would be a good idea to start out by doing the automatic patch bomb thing and try that out and see how that works. That's a different experiment to the one we tried, and I think it will get us somewhere forward. And the next step after that will be to experimentally pick a merge request or two and just do the reviews in the completely Forge-based way and not try to do it by email and see what we thought of it.
Okay. I mean, the issue with the patch bomb thing is, as you say, you basically don't get you get almost no advantages of the whole UI thing. So
you do significantly reduce the new contributor burden.
That's true. That's
Yeah,
true.
exactly. Not only that, but there is some tracking that can be done there as well, right? Because you do see the merge request and on the UI, so you have that part of the tracking done. Not the full tracking, right? But you cannot do the fancy comparison of commands, but some of it is there.
And also, if the patch bomb includes a link to the merge request, that also makes it easier for people on Zendeval to see where it's coming from and track it that way.
Yeah.
So if you want something to try it on, I have some Zenstore D patches that I sent to the mailing list long ago and they sort of got lost and not committed yet. So I was thinking of updating those. So we could use those as like a trial run of this when you think you got the infrastructure for it. It's not urgent to get it committed, but we could use that as an example, trying it out.
I think last time we tried something with the patch series was at least 10 patches. I think we should not do that again. I think we should.
Since it's a mistake last time, we tried the hardest problem first. That was instead of just trying to add MRs, right? We tried to merge the email workflow together with the web-based workflow for reviews, which is the most difficult of all the problems we discussed so far, right?
Yeah, I can try. There are, I think, some smaller patches that I could send as well that we could use to test this out. And also the maintainer for Zenstore D, Christian, is very used to the GitHub, doing the reviews on GitHub. And actually for him, doing the reviews on email means an additional burden. So it would be interesting to see from his point of view what his feedback would be as a reviewer of these patches and where the process could be improved. And of course, also if someone else who's used to an email workflow could take a look at those patches, even if not familiar with the code, then.
The advantage is also that we could, for Bertrand's point, is replying with Outlook is not great, but it's a lot better than sending emails with Outlook, right? So maybe, if we get a little bit more tolerant, then the email setup will be a lot easier. Because then you don't need to send email at all anymore. You only need to reply to review comments, and that might work a little bit better.
Do we have a volunteer to set up a shoddy gets an email robot? I guess I'll volunteer then.
Thank you.
Okay.
Let me know where I can send my patches as a test when you got it set up.
Cool.
I think we're nearly out of time. So if there are any final remarks that we need to do here, thank you very much for the constructive feedback on the topic and being receptive of other kinds of way of contributing to them.
Okay. I'll see you in Budapest in a second.
Ian, check Google search first. See if there's not somebody that's written something that at least, or maybe an example bot that tracks for merge requests, like consumes the GitLab API.
Right.
You can,
I'm hoping not to actually write code.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm trying to save you some time.
And
cool.
see whether Gerrit has some code that you could reuse.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you all.